right, thanks for joining me once again, where people continue to be wrong on the interwebs, don't they? Yes, they do. Here's our good friend, Mike Fave, a registered nurse who thinks he's an expert in biochemistry somehow. No, he's not. He's a registered nurse. Nothing wrong with being a registered nurse. It's a great profession. It's awesome, but it does not qualify you as an expert in any shape or form in biochemistry or metabolics or energetics or any of that kind of stuff. As such, I think Mike should probably go and do the bedpans. That said, I've locked horns with Mike before, so I know absolutely without any question that everything that's going to come out of his mouth is going to be nonsense, partial information, obfuscation, smoke and mirrors, or propaganda based. I also know that Mike is a devotee of what's called bioenergetics, which is a relatively recent branch of folks in the nutrition space talking about a bunch of erroneous ideas, or actually their erroneous interpretation of a bunch of ideas put forward by the late Ray Peat, much of which was incomprehensible because he was, for the last 20 years or so of his life, couldn't understand a word he said. His speech was so slurred. He had some problems, did Ray Peat, with his health for 20 years. Anyway, he's no longer with us. That's sad, because that would not allow him to correct Mike Fave, so I'll have to do it for him. Okay, Mike, why don't you tell us all about it, though? This one is called Why You Want to Be Burning Carbohydrates and Not Fat. So we know how this is going to go, don't we, kiddies? Stick around to the end, though, because I'm sure there'll be some surprises somewhere. All right, Mike, tell us all about it.
We've been told to fear carbs. That fat is fuel.
Who's told you to fear carbs? I don't fear carbs.
Insulin is the enemy, and that carbs are going to age us.
Well, some of those things have been said to some people, and some people have been silly enough to believe some of those things. None of those things, actually, though, are things that people in the know are actually saying. Only things that people who purport to be in the know are saying.
What if everything we've been told about the metabolism of carbs and fats is backwards?
What if everything that you hear from Mike Fave is nonsense? Which it's going to be.
Made to feel ashamed for craving carbs.
Nobody makes you feel anything, sunshine. It's your choice how you feel.
Told that it means we're weak or addicted. But what if those cravings aren't the problem? What if our carb cravings are actually the solution? No.
Oh my God. You know, every time I think Mike Fave could not present himself as being more stupid, he says something that presents himself as more stupid.
I've dug into the research.
Oh, you've dug into the research, have you, Mike? Have you actually ever done any research? No? Okay. Perhaps you shouldn't be talking about research then.
This video to show you how fueling your body with sugar and carbohydrates instead of perpetually fighting your cravings and relying on fat.
Oh, there you go. Give in to your cravings. Your cravings are great. Your cravings are for things that you should have. Excellent. I can stop putting down any cravings I have for alcohol or anything like that, because cravings are good. Fucking idiot.
Can actually restore your metabolism, your hormones, and bring back the energy and vitality that you thought you've lost. So in this video, I'm going to break down, number one, why sugar is actually a better fuel source for your body than fat.
Well, it isn't though, Mike, so false. Fail straight away. Repeat the course next semester. Or probably more likely be excluded from sitting again because, well, when I was an academic, I had the ability to exclude any student that I thought would genuinely have no chance of passing a second time, and as such it would be unethical to take their money again. You'd be excluded, Mike.
Number two, what's really behind symptoms so many people experience on low carb. Things like high fasting blood sugar in the morning, insomnia with 3 a.m. wake-ups, cold hands and cold feet, low sex hormones, dehydration, and muscle cramps.
Yeah, none of those things are things that are particularly common, actually, in people who eat a sensible diet, Michael.
Third, and finally, I'm going to show you how to reintroduce carbs safely and systematically in your diet.
No, well, you shouldn't be doing that because the exact dietary requirement for carbohydrates in human beings, Michael, is not 1 single gram ever, still.
So you can rebuild your metabolism without crashing and without weight gain. Now, before we get started, many of the core strategies I use to help my clients recover from a low-carb diet or a keto or a carnivore.
Recover from a low-carb diet? Recover from? Imbecile.
Diet are nutritional in nature. So I put together a free pro-metabolic diet calculator.
So what is your qualifications in human nutrition at all, Michael? Your experience of being a researcher in the first instance, first author on any papers whatsoever, Michael? Any at all? No? Well, what makes you think in a purple fit that you are remotely qualified to profess professionally, let alone charge people money, which I'm sure you do at some point, to get basically your ridiculous opinion, Michael. And let me just remind folks about opinions. They are very similar to arseholes in that almost everybody has one, and it's almost certainly full of shit. And Michael's is chock full to the gunwales of shit. It's absolute fucking nonsense. What's next?
And food guide that walks you through how to build out a personalized diet to restore your metabolism and find...
Restore your metabolism from what, Michael? What needs restoring?
Find your targets based on your unique context. You can grab it using the link in the description. Okay.
Yeah, don't do that. This is not something put together by someone who knows the first thing about what they're talking about.
So to start, I'm going to show you why you want to burn carbs and not burn fats.
Well, you're wrong, Michael. I do want to burn fats. The use of the word burn here is not appropriate, but okay, we'll go with that for now. I want to use fats for energy, not carbohydrates, Michael. Any suggestion that I want to do the opposite is false. There is absolutely nothing you can say that can provide any valid reason why I would want to do the inverse.
So there's 9 key pieces here in terms of why you want to burn carbs and not burn fats.
Yeah, but you still don't, and there are no reasons whatsoever that are valid for that.
They're not in any particular order. What we're going to do is we're going to walk through piece by piece. I'm going to show you step by step why carbs are the preferred fuel source.
They're not preferred, Michael. That's nonsense. Love an ad. Breaks up the nonsense.
Hi, my name is Ariana Corman. I'm the
Hello, Ariana. Bye.
So first things first, you will increase your cortisol signaling.
Okay. Says who? According to whom, on the basis of what? And that seems like a begging the question fallacy right there, Michael. What do you mean cortisol signaling exactly? Define that operationally, and then explain to us why that's a good thing. I presume that's what you're going to attempt to do. Let's hear it.
Now, acutely, on keto diets, you see an increase in the serum cortisol levels within the first couple weeks.
So what? That's supposed to happen, Michael. It's encoded for in your genes. There's a reason it happens. It has utility.
First 3 weeks or so. Now, after that, cortisol levels actually return to baseline. What we find in the research is that...
What research is that, Mike? If you're going to say the research, cite it.
Cortisol metabolism is shifted from that point afterwards. So
what does that mean? Cortisol metabolism is shifted. Define that, Michael. What are you referring to? Or are you just saying words because you want to sound intelligent?
Even if your serum levels aren't high, you can see a shift in metabolism at the cellular level where you increase an enzyme called 11-beta-HSD1 that increases the activation of cortisol from inactive cortisone, as well as the down...
So what, Michael? That's encoded for in your genes too. That's a system that works under given circumstances precisely in order to maintain homeostasis. Why would you imagine that to be a negative thing?
Downregulation of enzymes like 5-alpha reductase and 5-beta reductase that actually degrade cortisol and help you to...
So again, with the begging the question fallacy that having more cortisol is contraindicated and it needs to be broken down somehow at a given rate somehow. And the other begging the question fallacy, or just fallacy really, that after, well, at least 3,800 million years of evolution, whether you believe that's what's happened or not, those of you out there, it has. It's been shown scientifically, unequivocally, that after that long, our gene set is so fucking inane that it doesn't know how to maintain homeostasis. You ridiculous turd.
Read it. And I've actually seen this in clients on their Dutch test where their cortisol metabolites on the Dutch test are elevated.
So fucking what?
Even though their blood or their serum cortisol levels have actually dropped. Now,
so fucking what?
On top of this, in a carnivore diet, if it's also a low-carb, high-fat, and high-protein diet, you have a circumstance where you're upregulating the production of carbohydrates from proteins or from amino acids in a process called...
Michael, there are 3 gluconeogenic precursors, or 3 series of them, if you like, or categories of them. The only time you are going to use proteins or amino acids in any significant amount whatsoever to produce glucose is when there is no fat to speak of and no carbohydrate to speak of. Because the most common precursor for gluconeogenesis is lactate, Michael. The second most common is glycerol, the backbones of triacylglycerol molecules, or triglyceride if you want to call it that. The third most common are a couple of gluconeogenic amino acids. And again, the gluconeogenic amino acids only act as such, A, in an emergency situation, i.e. at end-stage starvation, or indeed if you eat so much protein that there's so much of it around that we don't need to look after it and we can use some of it up in that way. So there's no problem here still.
Gluconeogenesis, which produces a lot of ammonia. Now, ammonia...
Oh my God. It doesn't. It produces ammonium, not ammonia. And ammonium can be excreted at the kidneys without any problem. And it is.
Ammonia is a toxin.
Yeah, ammonia is a toxin, yes. Ammonium, not so much. That's why the body produces ammonium, which is almost non-toxic, and not ammonia, which would be very toxic. You fucking idiot. You ridiculous boy.
Needs to be detoxified via a cycle called the urea cycle. So what happens on these diets is you have an upregulation in the urea cycle. In order to support the urea cycle, you actually need to upregulate cortisol signaling and downregulate.
So, fucking what? It's called homeostasis, Michael. And you are still suffering, A, from very serious Dunning-Kruger, frankly, son, and B, a complete lack of understanding, patently, of homeostasis. Begging the question fallacy. More cortisol is bad. More cortisol is bad. No, at times cortisol ought to be elevated. It has roles. The description of cortisol as a stress hormone is parsimonious at best and actually probably outright erroneous, really. And secondary, there's a difference between stress and distress. If you are lacking in stress, if you have no stress, well, that's a very, very bad thing, isn't it, Michael? Because what's the situation if you have no stress at all? You are dead. All right? Idiot.
Androgenic hormone signaling with things like testosterone. So you see an increase in cortisol and a lowering of testosterone. If it's all...
Again, ever heard of homeostasis? Clearly not. Again, with the begging the question fallacy, less testosterone is necessarily contraindicated, is it? No, it isn't.
Also a high protein, high fat, low carb diet. So keto would be a high fat, low carb diet. Protein is controlled, whereas carnivore is more of a high fat, high protein diet. And then carbohydrates are just a limiting factor, so a low carbohydrate diet. Now, the second problem here with burning fatty acids is that you will increase the overall glucagon level. So
why would that be a bad thing, Michael?
Glucagon is another stress hormone like...
No. Idiot. Same argument as for stress hormone cortisol. Wrong again. Second swing, second miss. Let's see out of his 9, let's see if he gets 1 right. He won't, because there is no reason why a person should want to be oxidizing carbohydrates in preference to oxidizing fat for energy ongoingly. No reason whatever.
Cortisol, and its job is to take amino acids and different substrate that aren't glucose.
I thought its job was to cause stress, Michael. It's a stress hormone, remember, according to you? So now you're saying it actually has a role to play? Well, fuck, which is it, Michael?
Convert them into glucose in a process called gluconeogenesis. Its job is also to upregulate fatty acid oxidation at the cells.
Mm-hmm.
So what you find in people who are...
So its job is to assist in a particular way with homeostasis. It's almost as if it exists because there's a length of DNA that encodes for its production. Excellent. Good.
Are on a low carbohydrate, high fat diet, they actually have higher fasting glucagon levels.
So fucking what?
And they also have higher postprandial glucagon levels. So their
so fucking what?
Glucagon levels are higher overall.
You said that, and so fucking what still?
A lot of people say, okay, this isn't a big deal. Glucagon's not really that, it's a normal hormone. It's not really...
All hormones are normal, Michael. They're all encoded for by our genes, you ridiculous child.
A stress hormone. But what you actually find in...
I'm sure there's some bedpans that need doing. Why don't you go and do those, boy?
The research is that higher levels of fasting glucagon and in postprandial glucagon are found in people who have impaired fasting glucose intolerance or impaired glucose intolerance. And
impaired glucose tolerance according to whom, on the basis of what? And just because one thing is found in a group of individuals that express a certain phenotypical presentation or genotypical presentation, as the case may be, Michael, so fucking what? Does that establish cause and effect? No? Perhaps you should go and do the bedpans then.
Also people who are type 2 diabetics. So the higher the glucagon levels, typically the worse the metabolic function. So these
worst metabolic function, you need to define that, Michael. According to whom, on the basis of what?
diets are selecting for higher glucagon levels overall. And we tend to see these high glucagon levels in states like diabetes, non-alcoholic fatty liver disease.
We also invariably, just about, Michael, we find larger feet in children between age 5 and 10 who are better at mathematics. The bigger your feet between ages 5 and 10, the better you are at mathematics, it seems. Does that mean we can stop wasting money on mathematics teachers and instead genetically alter fetuses so that the children are all born with big feet so that they'll all be born mathematical geniuses? You fucking imbecile! What's next?
Wells, other states like chronic kidney disease. So we do not want to be selecting for glucagon, nor do we want to be selecting.
Absolute fucking nonsense, Michael. What we want to do is eat a species-appropriate, species-specific diet and allow our homeostatic mechanism to sort all the other shit out for us. Because that's what it does, still.
For cortisol.
Let's have some more ads.
Wherever you are. Whatever you might be doing.
Now, the third reason, if you have the
carbohydrates. All right, so 2 swings, 2 misses.
Hydrates too low in the diet, what you wind up having is an increase in sex hormone binding globulin.
According to whom? On the basis of what? You want to establish that with anything?
Carbohydrates directly control.
So just putting these words up here and these numbers up on here doesn't prove anything. There's no citation there to any peer-reviewed literature that would lead me to believe that there's anything worth seeing here whatsoever. And you've just said carbohydrates directly control. This will be interesting to see what you're going to say next.
Sex hormone binding globulin.
No, they don't, Michael. There's no evidence for that whatsoever.
At production at the liver by interacting with a pathway called the hepatic nuclear factor 4 alpha pathway. And essentially, the less carbs you have, the more activity this pathway you have, and the more SHBG you have.
Right, so what? So what?
Now,
even if that were true, which it isn't necessarily, because you just made a sweeping generalization without speaking about, A, where such data would be published, who the subjects were, what their characteristics were, what was the noise around that signal, or anything, Michael. You've just made a sweeping statement that is not the statement of a scientist. It's the statement of a fucking imbecile. Of a little boy who thinks he's ever so clever because he can say words bigger than wheelbarrow. A boy with absolutely no fucking understanding whatsoever of actual metabolic function, homeostatic function, or physiology in any way, shape, or form. And those bedpans are really starting to pile up, son.
What you see in keto studies or people who are on keto diets is that they tend to have higher sex hormone binding globulin levels.
So, and would you like to give us a peer-reviewed publication that establishes that so that we can have a look at the mean results, the sample size, the length of time that this was looked at over, the signal-to-noise ratio issues, any other issues around the methodology that might actually degrade the veracity of such a statement? Or you just want to make a sweeping statement which is actually not based in science whatsoever, you pathetic fucking little boy. How about that?
When they're on a keto diet, or when they're not on a keto diet and they move to a keto diet, SHBG increases over time. Now,
no, you've just made another sweeping statement that it's not correct. Some people will respond quite differently from that, Michael.
Sex hormone binding globulin is important because it binds up the sex hormones. That's going to be testosterone, that's going to be estradiol, and essentially, when these hormones are bound to SHBG via the free hormone hypothesis, they are less...
Hypothesis, Michael, okay? So you're guessing.
...likely to interact with the tissues. So this is why you can have somebody, and I've seen this with quite a few clients, where essentially their sex hormone binding globulin levels are high, and despite having very high testosterone levels, they actually feel like they have low testosterone symptoms, where libido isn't as good, motivation isn't as good, workouts aren't as good, and then morning wood and things like this aren't working as well.
All things that might be related to all sorts of things, Michael, and not related to their sex hormone levels, active, bound, unbound, or anything else. You really are absolutely, completely out of your depth, boy.
And in women can lose their cycle or have problems with their hormones when they go on some of these diets. In the research, if you...
Yes, and a lot of people that go on these sort of diets, Michael, do not have any fucking problems. What's your point? Other than you don't have a point. You're pointless. You're a complete waste of perfectly good oxygen.
have very low SHBG levels because you have insulin resistance.
Insulin resistance is a construct, Michael. And it's one that you have absolutely no ability to interpret remotely competently.
Or fatty liver or something like this, which can also shift it. Then going on a keto diet, losing weight, and correcting that can actually raise the SHBG into a normal range. But the goal here isn't just...
Who's to say that they want to be in the normal range? Because, Michael, what's normal out there in society is ill health, isn't it? Nurses know all about ill health, don't they, Michael? In terms of nursing and dealing with people who are in ill health in hospitals and such. That's what nurses do. They also clean the bedpans, Michael. What they don't do is come online and make themselves out to be an expert in a field that they absolutely fucking are not an expert in. Okay? Just a hint for you.
Just have SHBG as low as possible, nor is it to have it as high as possible. There's a Goldilocks zone. And if you're already lean and you're already pretty healthy and you start going on a carnivore or a keto diet, you can raise your SHBG to a level that it can...
And that leaves maybe not too entirely on the table. And like the vast, I guess, trend in people that follow a carnivore diet is that everything improves massively in their lives. And these potential problems you're talking about do not raise their heads. And if they do, there's usually a pretty simple solution when they talk to someone competent, Michael, which is not you. So what's next?
Actually bind up those hormones become problematic. You have the upregulation of the stress hormones.
No, there are no such thing as stress hormones, Michael, still.
Of glucagon and cortisol.
No, they're not stress hormones. They're just hormones that have roles to play, and they are expressed in the human body when those genes are tapped. Okay? Still.
And you have a lowering of your sex steroids when you're...
Again, so what? And maybe I don't, Michael. Maybe I'm not one of the people that responds that way. You haven't included those people. You've made a blanket statement that's absolute fucking nonsense. Again.
On a low-carb, high-fat diet and all potentially high...
You also should write yourself a script before you start speaking, Michael, because you're just talking in circles here. You've been on the same point here for several minutes. You've repeated yourself, I don't know how many times, brain fog much, and all you've done is repeat ridiculous, erroneous fucking nonsense. Nothing else.
High-protein diet, you also have a downregulation of your thyroid hormone function. So...
Okay, no. According to whom? On the basis of what? False, Michael. Complete nonsense. So 4 swings, 4 misses.
What winds up happening is you get lower T3 levels.
No, you don't. Not necessarily at all. Some people might. A few people might. But you haven't produced us any evidence whatsoever that what you're saying is remotely backed by any kind of observation, let alone any kind of cause and effect relationship, Michael. So off you fuck.
T3 is the active thyroid hormone. This is the thyroid hormone that has all the effects at the cells. It increases mitochondrial respiration. It increases the production of new mitochondria. When you're on a keto diet, you lower the T3 value. And what winds up happening...
Do you know what? Even if that were true, which it isn't necessarily because it's individual, don't you think, Michael, that in those where that occurs, that's part of the homeostatic mechanism and it's supposed to occur? Just so that the body sets itself up in such a way as to be best conduced to maintaining its homeostasis, irrespective, pretty much within acceptable operational limits of whatever situation that those genes are placed at any given time. Good.
As you increase the reverse T3 value.
No, not necessarily. Again, you're making blanket statements about what everybody can expect. And you haven't cited anything here either. So, no.
Reverse T3 is essentially T3's nemesis. It has kind of an opposite action as T3. In some of the research, there's the idea that it competes with T3 for binding sites at the cell.
So, fucking what?
And also, the pro-hormones of both reverse T3 and T3 is T4 And if you're converting more towards reverse T3 and away from T3, you're basically draining away that T4 into that reverse T3
So what? All of these things happen because they're supposed to.
pathway, which again does not have the active effect at the cells. Now, what's even worse, the hypothalamic pituitary axis, where you see a TRH and TSH release to tell the thyroid to make more hormone in a circumstance when there's not enough thyroid hormone like T3.
So who says there's not enough? Where did you get that one from, Michael? Not enough according to whom, on the basis of what?
Those don't increase. Those hormones don't
It's almost like they're not supposed to, because the body knows what it's doing. Fuck me. Okay, what's next?
increase to tell the thyroid to make more thyroid hormone. The hypothalamus is just like, okay, like we're on this keto
So now you're going to anthropomorphize an organ as if it has a conscience and a thought process, are you? Dickhead.
diet. We don't have enough carbohydrates coming in. So
According to whom, on the basis of what? Because enough carbohydrates coming in to the body, Michael, is none. Not 1 single gram ever still.
we're just going to keep thyroid signaling lower overall. We're not going to even try to increase it when it's in a state that it's low. So this can actually worsen thyroid function overall
According to whom, on the basis of what, Michael?
for people long term, especially people.
And you said it can do that. Maybe can means maybe not to. It's entirely still on the table, isn't it? Yes. Right, what's next?
Who are dealing with thyroid dysfunction from the get-go. And then
Thyroid dysfunction? How did you get to thyroid dysfunction on the basis that the levels of various hormones and their subfractions is altered in some way? Begging the question fallacy. Mechanistic speculation based in falsehood.
top of that, it looks like thyroid function is okay if you just test TSH, which is what many doctors and what some of the studies have done. They just test TSH and T4, but you need to look at reverse T3.
No, you don't. What you need to do with a person is look at their affect, Michael. Overall, to make any kind of suggestive statement around what it is they may do to optimize their affect going forward. And the values of various hormones and their subfractions is not one of the particularly valuable tools.
And you need to look at T3 values to truly understand what's going on.
No, you don't, Michael. To truly understand what's going on, you need to stop listening to absolute fucking imbeciles like Mike Fave here, who should be doing the bedpans. You need to come and listen to someone who actually has some experience as a research scientist in the field and who understands their epistemology of science, which Michael does not. At all. Sorry about that, not sorry.
And it's well known at this point that those are actually lower on low carbohydrate diets. Now, before we talk about some of the next points, I just want to put this in the...
So, 4 swings, 4 misses. You already struck out +1. You're going to strike out 3 times in 9 attempts here, Michael, is what's going to happen, I can promise you. Go on, though.
context. Why are all these hormones shifting in this way when
Because it's called homeostasis, Michael, that's why.
you're on a low-carb diet? Low-carb, carnivore, ketogenic diets.
Oh, hang on, which, Michael? Because they're all very different diets, aren't they, Sunshine?
Are essentially a fasting mimicking or...
No, absolutely fucking not. Rubbish. Nonsense. Complete fucking garbage, Michael.
starvation mimicking diet.
No, absolute fucking nonsense again. No.
They trigger the same pathways that you would
That doesn't make them similar diets. Jesus Christ. You imbecile.
typically see under states of fasting or starvation. Now, when you're in these circumstances, you don't have the insulin signaling, you don't have the carbohydrates coming in. The
You don't need any carbohydrates coming in, Michael, still.
body starts to say, all right, like we don't really
No,
have
your body doesn't start to say anything, Michael. You can't anthropomorphize the body as if it has thought processes. It doesn't.
have as much fuel here that we want, and we don't have that carbohydrate fuel coming in. So
You don't need carbohydrate fuel coming in, Michael, still. No amount of saying, I need carbohydrates will make it true. It still isn't. You don't. Not 1 single gram ever, still.
but you know what? We're not actually going to allow for the sex steroids to have their target function. We don't need testosterone to build a bunch of muscle tissue right now. We don't need to have offspring or have children right now. This is not an ideal
You certainly don't, Michael.
state. So we're going to try to control some of the secondary sex hormones. We don't need to increase our metabolism at this point in time because essentially...
What point are you trying to make here, Michael? What is this supposed to be showing us? A bunch of things listed completely out of any kind of context whatsoever up on the screen that you're just progressively crossing out as you talk inane fucking drivel. What is your point?
Essentially, we don't have the adequate fuel coming in, so we don't need to uprate.
We do have adequate fuel coming in, Michael, even without carbohydrates, so long as we're eating sufficient fat. Because we can run on fat. It seems better, rather than as well as, on carbs.
Regulate the thyroid hormone signaling. And then on top of that, when you have the elevations in the stress hormones...
No, still absolute nonsense. It doesn't matter how many times you refer to them as stress hormones, it doesn't make it so. Still.
The cortisol and the glucagon...
They're still not stress hormones, no.
Okay, yeah, you're seeing, we're kind of in a stressful state overall.
Well, again, if you have no stress, you're dead, Michael.
So we're going to break down our tissue stores. We're going to break down our...
No, fucking nonsense. Absolute fucking nonsense.
Protein stores and our fat stores.
No, we're not going to do anything like that. Fat, yes. Fat is broken down, transported through the blood and used for energy when it's needed, absolutely. Proteins, already into our body structures, are not dissolved and broken down for energy until end stage fucking starvation. Idiot.
With the cortisol and with the glucagon levels so that we can maintain our blood glucose because our central nervous system, our red blood cells, and some other tissues need that glucose.
That's right. That's why gluconeogenesis exists, you fucking imbecile. Because it subserves those needs. 100% well. Only 3,800 million years of it.
But then we're going to let the rest of the body run on fatty acids because we can store a lot of fats, but we can't store a lot of carbs. So the body is shifting to adapt to this stressful state.
That's not a stressful state to eat a species-appropriate, species-specific diet, Michael, which is hyper-carnivore. Very low in carbohydrates. Very low indeed in carbohydrates. Not at all stressful.
This kind of starvation-like state.
That's nothing like starvation, you stupid, arrogant, ignorant child. No, it isn't.
There's ramifications of this. It's going to turn...
What?
Turn down other processes.
What?
Because we don't have the energy to support those.
We fucking do. It's in the form of the fat, you stupid
processes. And we're seeing that play out across the entire hormonal profile, right?
No, you're not, because you don't know how to interpret a hormonal profile. You think putting the label stress on a hormone means it's bad, begging the question fallacy.
Okay, with sex steroids their action is getting lowered at the cell.
Well, maybe there's a reason for that.
Thyroid hormones coming down, and then the stress hormones with cortisol.
No, still not stress hormones, Michael. Still not.
Glucagon are rising in these states. Now, the next thing is, and this is a big one, because you want to
unlike anything you've got, Michael.
Make sure that you have optimal electrolyte and hydration balance. When you are...
Well, sure. So, saying that you need that is a correct statement. Now you're going to say that a low-carbohydrate diet won't allow you to have that, which is false, Michael. Absolutely false. So that's going to be swing number 5, miss number 5. Off you go, though.
For low carbohydrate, when you have low carbohydrate intake and you're running primarily on fatty acids, you adjust your insulin signaling. And this...
It's almost as if that's supposed to happen.
Adjust your ability to retain sodium at the kidneys. So
yeah, somewhat, yeah. Maybe.
You waste your sodium, you pee it out. And
maybe it's not needed under those circumstances quite so much.
And also take the potassium and push it into your cells. When you don't have the insulin signaling, you're not able to effectively push the potassium into the cells.
How is it then, Michael, that people are able to eat a 100% carnivorous diet for multiple decades and not have any problem with their electrolytes? Are we done? Yes, we are. Shut the fuck up, you mindless cunt. What's next?
So the intracellular area becomes dehydrated and low on potassium.
Except it doesn't, though, Michael. Does it? So you're talking about a hypothetical problem that actually doesn't usually rear its head so much. There are 1 or 2 people that get themselves into problems with their electrolytes in the early stages, usually, of a carnivore diet when they don't really know what they're doing and they listen to fucking imbeciles. Because we've got them over here too, Michael, in this field, in the carnivore community. We've got imbeciles over here too, yes, that don't know what they're talking about. None of them are quite as stupid as you are, Michael, but that's for another day. There are also people that get into trouble with their electrolytes that are not on a carnivore diet or a low carbohydrate diet too. But we're going to conveniently not mention those folks, are we?
The blood, the fluid inside the blood or the intravascular space becomes low in sodium. And
except mine isn't though, Michael. I'm an example of one of those who eats a very low carbohydrate diet, typically, and I don't have these problems. So your hypothetical model here is not correct, is it? Doesn't pan out in the objective reality in which we find ourselves. That's a shame for you.
Also have this feeling of dehydration. That's why a lot of people...
This feeling of dehydration, what the fuck is that when it's at home? Do you mean thirst? Or what? Or are you just saying words again? I think he's just saying words.
Who are on these diets are feeling muscle cramps.
Yeah, no, we're not, Michael. No. Some people are. Absolutely, but some people also experience muscle cramps who are not on a carnivore diet because they're not quite doing it right either. What's your point?
Hydration, and they're pounding sodium. They're taking their LMNT pack.
Yeah, no, we're not. And anyone that takes LMNT hasn't read the fucking label. Or indeed has believed what it says on the label, because apparently the problem is they actually lied on the label. Stuff's full of sugar, I'm told. Don't know if it's true or not. That's what I'm told. Allegedly.
And whatnot to make sure that they're hydrated. And then they're also having these problems with the muscle contractions.
No, there's no problems with muscle contractions. No. Inherently on a carnivore diet. No.
Again, the ability to maintain potassium inside the cell and the ability to maintain sodium inside the intravascular space is altered when you don't have the insulin signaling for the insulin to push the potassium into the cell and the insulin to retain the sodium at the kidney.
Except that doesn't happen pretty much, Michael, except in people who do it badly wrong. There are people doing all sorts of diets wrong, aren't there? And yes, there are things that you can do that can lead you to electrolyte problems. On a sensible, well-formulated, well-put-together carnivorous diet, these things do not occur.
And on top of that, when thyroid function is lowered, you actually aren't able to retain magnesium very well inside the cells.
Except I have no problem with my magnesium, for example. So there's another N equals 1 there. It doesn't work out in the objective reality.
Magnesium, the thyroid helps to increase ATP production, and the ATP binds to magnesium.
All this reductionist nonsense, Michael. All you're doing is spewing your pseudo-intellectual knowledge of various systems reductively, i.e. in isolation to the context of a whole working human body, which has homeostatic mechanisms that keep everything in check, pretty much. There are still absolutely no reasons whatsoever why a carnivorous diet or a low carbohydrate diet is not entirely maintainable throughout the lifespan. Because, Michael, the exact requirement for dietary carbohydrates is still not 1 single gram ever. And those bedpans are not going to go and deal with themselves, boy.
Magnesium in the cell and helps to retain that magnesium altogether. So you have lowered magnesium and lowered potassium in the cell and lowered...
No, I don't, Michael. No.
Sodium in the intravascular space.
No.
Which drives this issues with electrolytes.
No, I don't have any issues with my electrolytes, Michael.
Drives issue with hydration.
No, it doesn't. I have no problem with my hydration, Michael.
Drives issues with muscle cramping.
No, I don't have muscle cramping either, Michael.
6th reason here.
So 5 swings, 5 misses. Great. What's 6?
Here is that when you rely on fatty acids, you produce less CO2.
Well, so what?
Than when you rely on carbohydrates as your fuel source. This is something that's seen in the respiratory quotient. So with...
No, it's not actually particularly, Michael. Goodness gracious.
With less carbohydrate overall, you have less CO2.
So you don't even understand the respiratory quotient. You have a parsimonious at best overview in your mind of what the respiratory quotient is, how it's measured and what it actually means. You haven't acknowledged there, obviously, the many very serious flaws with it as an inference on anything. Michael, I've done more respiratory gas analysis tests in my life than you've had hot feeds, boy. I have worked out people's respiratory quotients more times than you've had cold feeds or hot feeds, boy. Now you're going to tell me that it's desirable to have a higher level of carbon dioxide, which is absolute fucking nonsense. What's next?
and you produce, and more oxygen is required based on how the two different sources are metabolized. And with more carbohydrates, you have more CO2 produced, and you have less oxygen that's required to some extent. Now, why is
That's not true, Michael.
this important? Well,
That's a reductionist view based on the number of oxygens inherently in carbohydrate molecules versus fat molecules. It doesn't get any better than that. It has no bearing whatsoever to how the actual system runs in a human body. None at all.
this is important because of the Bohr and the Haldane effects. And the Bohr and the Haldane effects are basically these hypotheses or these mechanisms.
They're not hypotheses, they are facts, Michael. They are two things, two effects that affect the hemoglobin oxygenation saturation curve, which is a sigmoidal curve, precisely because, Michael, what that achieves is the ability for a human being to survive at quite a wide range of oxygen tensions. That's what it does. It's there for a reason. It's helpful. It's indicated. My word, this is just inane spluttering from a boy that knows one or two things about one or two systems in complete isolation to how they actually work together. As I've said many times, and I'll say it again, this is a boy who ought to go and do the fucking bedpans, not to come online here and make out like he knows what he's talking about.
That describe how hemoglobin unloads oxygen in the tissues with a high CO2 concentration.
Yeah, Michael, in my experience, which is significant, of doing respiratory gas analysis on unfit people, fit people, semi-elite, and indeed elite professional athletes and those in professionally physically demanding occupations, thousands and thousands and thousands and thousands of times, I can tell you something that's very interesting here. Here it is. At the end of a physically exhausting ramp test to maximum exercise capacity in any given individual, at no time does that person ever get anywhere close to using all of the oxygen available that was breathed in. It's no more than about a quarter of it. 3/4 of the oxygen breathed in at the lungs is breathed straight back out as oxygen untouched, Michael. Okay? Fuck's sake.
And then unloads CO2 and takes up oxygen at the lungs with a high oxygen concentration. So you want your cells and tissues to be producing large amounts of CO2.
No, you fucking don't. You want them producing the exact amount of CO2 that they need to produce on the basis of what it is they are oxidizing to produce ATP at that time. The reason the oxygen dissociation association curve is sigmoidal is precisely to maintain homeostasis across a wide range. Michael.
So that when your red blood cells reach your cells and your tissues, they can unload that oxygen to the cells and tissues so that the cells and tissues can take that oxygen and use it in the electron transport chain to produce ATP.
Oh my God, there is never a shortage of oxygen, Michael. I've just explained that to you.
So the higher CO2 production, the better blood flow and the better mitochondrial function that you have going on, because you can unload oxygen a bit better than if you had a circumstance where you had a lower CO2 production. So carbs.
Right, so more reductionist nonsense from an idiot that does not understand the physiology and energetics at all of muscle function or cellular function in any way, shape or form. Just mindless, ridiculous, excremental torrent of nonsense.
Produce more CO2 at the cells and tissues than fats. Now, the next thing is with fatty acid oxidation, because of how the fats are burned, and I talk about this inside the ramp.
Fats don't burn, really, Michael. It's a very inept terminology for the oxidation of fats. Burning implies a different process to what really goes on.
Cycle video. You have an
Yeah, your Randall cycle video, that's a laugh. That's a hoot.
increased rate of O2 consumption in order to produce the same amount of ATP because the fatty acids induce things like...
Yeah, but see, Michael, that's not a problem, is it? Because still, 3/4 of the oxygen breathed in is breathed straight back out, even at the maximum individual oxygen uptake level. Still. Okay? So shut the fuck up, you mindless cunt. What's next?
uncoupling. So essentially you have a circumstance where you have less CO2 being produced.
Yeah, which is fine.
And an increased oxygen need with fats.
Which is fine, because that can be subserved from the 3/4 that it's not being used, even at maximum level. Still.
But potentially a harder time delivering that oxygen because of the less CO2 overall.
Except you say that's potentially so, but it's proven not to be so by the fact that 3/4 of it is breathed straight back out. You stupid cunt.
So it's not really an ideal circumstance.
According to whom, on the basis of what? You stupid cunt.
Across the board, you'd really want to have a substrate where you're producing quite a bit of CO2. And
No, you really fucking don't.
you don't have as high of an oxygen demand.
Rubbish, Michael. Absolute fucking nonsense.
So this leads us to the seventh point here. When you are burning
So 6 swings, 6 misses. You're out twice. Let's see if we can get you out 3 times.
fatty acids, you increase the ratio of NADH to NAD+. And this is not really a good thing.
Nonsense, Michael. Absolute fucking nonsense again. Another swing, another miss.
In most of the research,
Which research is that, Michael? Which research? Shall we wait? Arrogant boy.
an increased or a shift towards NADH and the NAD plus NADH ratio
Yep, so what?
is associated with diabetes across multiple.
So what? Ice creams and sunburn, Michael. There are many things that affect many other things in the human body. There are many reasons why the NAD plus to NADH ratio might be altered from time to time, all as part of the homeostatic mechanism. Still.
Cells and tissues. It's associated with metabolic dysfunction.
Yes, and also associated with situations that are not dysfunctional as well.
As you get too much NADH inside the cell, you have a circumstance where you can start to increase reactive oxygen species production.
Yeah, and also you have the capacity to deal with those, Michael, when they do accrue, if they do accrue. Because again, are you going to show me any evidence that they actually do? No? Okay. We have a whole suite of antioxidants that the body produces. H2O2 dismutase, glutathione, for example. Any antioxidants you might have floating around because you might be stupid enough to eat some plant materials that have those kind of things in them. You don't need them. Because also you can ground yourself electrically to the earth and get antioxidant effect that way. So not a problem. What's next? Swing and a miss.
So you start to create issues throughout the electron transport chain.
Nope, no issues at all, Michael. None whatsoever.
And an upstream throughout the Krebs cycle.
Absolute fucking nonsense. Nope. Wrong.
So now you have a circumstance where as the NAD plus and NADH ratio is shifted and NADH starts to actually increase inside the mitochondria, you can get reverse electron transport with increase.
Okay, have you seen any studies, Michael, where that's been measured and tracked? And if you have, do those studies talk to you about the fact that you can upregulate things like H2O2 dismutase? Glutathione can be upregulated, and that you can ground yourself to the earth and counteract that? At all? No on both counts? Okay, great.
Increase ROS production from complex 1. And this is driven not by carb consumption per se, but by a higher amount of fat consumption overall with less carb consumption. And then on top of that, the fatty acids can drive an increased amount of ROS production through another section inside the electron transport chain via the electron transport flavoprotein. I'll put up an image on screen here so you can see this, but essentially you start to increase ROS from 2 steps in the mitochondrial electron transport chain when you burn fats versus when you burn carbs.
So begging the question, fallacy that reactive oxygen species are necessarily contraindicated, problematic and need to be dealt with, when in fact they function as messengers. They function in such a fashion as to make sure that the cell knows, for want of a better term, what the energetic state is, and thus how to best optimize its homeostasis accordingly. Nothing to see here.
On top of increasing the ratio of NADH to NAD+,
Which is still a begging the question fallacy that that's a problem. It still fucking isn't, Michael.
a higher amount of NADH. These are both bad signs.
No, they're fucking not, Michael. That is your opinion. Remember what we said about opinions earlier on?
From a standpoint of mitochondrial energy production.
Absolutely fucking wrong, Michael. No, it isn't a problem for mitochondria whatsoever to run entirely on fat throughout their fucking lives. Not a problem at all.
And are typically associated with disease processes.
Yeah, and not too. Disease processes are associated with a lot of things because disease processes occur to human bodies, and human bodies still have all these processes, which sometimes are up or down regulated as per the homeostatic mechanism, as per the needs at that time.
Now, the eighth reason...
Right, so 7 swings, 7 misses.
Carbohydrates, on top of having a lower ROS production, are actually able to increase the amount of glutathione that's regenerated, as well as increase antioxidant defenses through the thyroidoxin system. So
homeostasis occurs when you change the substrate that's being oxidized. Well, fuck me. So what?
When carbohydrates are oxidized, they move through glycolysis, and via glycolysis they can move into something called the pentose phosphate pathway.
Right.
The pentose phosphate pathway is quite important for regenerating glutathione and also regenerating the thyroidoxin system. And both glutathione and the thyroidoxin system are extremely important for mopping up reactive oxygen species. Now, the carbohydrates via...
well, they are, if that's the only means. However, the body has multiple means by which it mops up reactive oxygen species to the exact degree that they need to be mopped up. Still. Yet more reductionism. Yet more, look, I can bring up a chart of this particular pathway, which I don't fucking understand, Michael, clearly, and its context to the rest of the world.
The pentose phosphate pathway induce the production of NADPH, which is involved with the regeneration of that glutathione and the thyroidoxin. So when you don't have the carbohydrates, when they're low carb, high...
Well, hang on a minute though, Michael. You do still have carbohydrates, even if you don't consume carbohydrates, don't you? Because gluconeogenesis. Still. So there goes that problem. Fucking idiot.
Fat diet, and you have less flux through the glycolysis here, and you have less production of NADPH. You can have less production.
In case it wasn't really clear already, I find this boy, this child, this ridiculous buffoon here, particularly offensive. It really offends me when ignoramus like this ridiculous cunt make videos professing to know something about something when it's absolutely clear that this boy wouldn't know the difference between his elbow and his asshole if I labelled both of them and taught him how to read. It's absolutely fucking ridiculous. Go and clean the fucking bedpans. Fuck's sake.
Production or less regeneration of glutathione and the thyroidoxins. And then
homeostasis still works.
On top of that, when you have an increased ROS production from fatty acids in the mitochondria,
your body still reacts to that in the appropriate fashion as well. So that's still not a problem. Who's that clippity-clopping on my bridge? Don't know.
Of increased ROS and decreased antioxidants to actually mop that ROS up. So
homeostasis still works.
Bad combination.
No. Nonsense.
Altogether.
No, fucking nonsense. So, 8 swings, 8 misses. Number 9.
The 9th reason, running on fats doesn't necessarily protect you from glycation. And this is one of the...
So, the reason not to do something is because it doesn't necessarily do something else. That's the biggest fucking ear swing so far of the lot, Michael. Wow.
Major reasons that people have discussed running keto diets instead of high carb diets, because high carb diets would glycate you, right?
That's right. That's a reason for not doing that. And yes, you might still get glycation damage on a low carbohydrate diet if you don't manage things sensibly and eat a species-appropriate, species-specific version. That's possible. However, if you minimize, absolutely, the vast overplus of contraindicated unnecessary carbohydrates by not eating any, then you would minimize that risk, wouldn't you? Yeah.
increase the glycation inside your cells. The concern around this started with the idea that glucose and fructose were much more glycating than fatty acids.
Well, of course they fucking are, because the hint, Michael, is in the title of the thing, glycation, not fattication. Okay? Seriously, son. It's well past time that you went back on the wards, picked up those bedpans, and dealt with those. Seriously, this is beyond a joke.
And then fructose especially was much more glycating than glucose.
That's right, it is. About 7 to 11 times more, it seems.
It was like 8 times more glycating.
7 to 11, okay, 8's in that range, I suppose.
This actually is, these are true, but this is kind of an obfuscation of the overarching picture.
Okay, so there's the biggest bit of projection I've seen all day. Coming from a boy, a reductionist, a child, academically and professionally, in terms of knowing anything about cell energetics, cell biology, metabolic pathways, other than can bring up pictures of isolated pathways without reference whatsoever to how they interact. Unreal.
Sure. Essentially, even the fructose is more glycating than glucose.
Yes, we know that, yes.
Glucose is in significantly higher concentrations in the blood than fructose will ever be.
Well, it depends on what your diet is.
So you have a circumstance where even if fructose is 8 times more glycating, since glucose is multiple times higher levels in the blood than fructose, more than 8 times higher than fructose.
Depends what you eat, Michael, though, doesn't it?
It doesn't really matter how glycating the fructose is comparatively to glucose, because
it does matter. You fucking imbecile.
Concentrations are going to be very different. Then on top of this, the glycation that we're really concerned about, yes, you have glycation in hemoglobin A1C, but the glycation that we're concerned about from an aging standpoint is going to be glycation inside cellular processes.
Yeah, so?
Fructose can be created inside the cell under metabolic stress through the polyol pathway.
No, not under stress. It is a normal part of the metabolic process that is activated when it ought to be, given circumstances that the body finds not remotely stressful, in fact.
Right. And that's not necessarily a consumption issue in terms of that you're eating carbs in your diet. That could be more of an issue around metabolism at the cell being broken. There being problems inside the mitochondria.
What's broken, Michael, is your ridiculous idea that you have the first fucking clue of what you're talking about and that you are remotely in a position to profess to anybody else. That's badly, badly broken, sunshine. You need to shut the fuck up permanently, frankly.
And inside cellular metabolism in general. But the next thing that's really important is that there's a component that's even 40,000 times more reactive than glucose, and that's methylglyoxal.
I've dealt with this one already in answering a ridiculous statement made by one, not really a doctor, Paul Sellard. I don't know who Bart K is. You can find that on my fine YouTube offerings if you look. So I won't deal with it again here in order to keep this as close to an hour as possible. But it's already been dealt with. No, Michael, wrong again. It's not a problem on a carnivore diet whatsoever.
Methylglyoxal, can be produced from metabolites of glycolysis like dihydroxyacetone phosphate. It can also be produced directly from ketones. So the ketone acetone
can be, and yes, sometimes it is and sometimes it isn't, so that's fine.
Can be converted to methylglyoxal inside the body. And
you do know that a carnivore diet isn't a particularly ketogenic diet, though, Michael, I hope. I hope you understand at least that much.
In fact, in people who are on keto diets, we see a drastic...
Maybe you don't understand that, of course, because as it seems, you lump together low carbohydrate, keto, and carnivore diets as if they're one thing. You conflate those things. You have done repeatedly in this video. They're not the same thing, are they, Michael? No.
Drastic increase in methylglyoxal production via the conversion from acetone. And so now we have a circumstance for...
Acetone, which is volatile and can be breathed out of the lungs, Michael. Oh, yeah, okay.
It's like, okay, I'm on a keto diet to protect myself from glycation, but it's like, yes, but you still are
Most people that are on a ketogenic diet, Michael, are on a ketogenic diet because they have too much body fat and they're trying to get rid of it. That's generally the reason why a person, any given person, would go to that dietary pattern. Occasionally it's used in intractable epilepsy, with quite good effect, seems. But mostly, the vast majority of people on a ketogenic diet are doing that because they believe that's the best way to lose body fat. Nothing to do with being concerned about glycation or to protect themselves from glycation. Okay?
Experiencing glycation, and on top of that, it's even a step worse because the detoxification pathways for methylglyoxal rely on the glyoxylase system mainly, and secondarily on the aldolase system. Now, the glyoxylase...
Yeah. Dealt with already in that video I did responding to Paul. So go and check that out. This is just rubbish. Again, it's just reductionist, nonsensical garbage, basically. This is taking, again, one section of metabolism out of context of the whole picture and saying, look at this. It's like presenting someone with a cog out of a Datsun 180B engine and saying, look, this is how the gearbox works. No, that's a cog by itself. Which other cogs does it interact with? In what way? How does the overall function of the thing happen? That's the problem here, Michael.
System is dependent upon glutathione in order to function to clear out the methylglyoxal. And where does that glutathione come from? That glutathione is being regenerated via NADPH via the pentose phosphate pathway.
Yeah, which is subserved, in the case of someone who consumes no carbohydrates, by the fact that those people still have carbohydrates. Because, Michael, gluconeogenesis, you stupid, arrogant, ignorant fucking turd. What's next?
And you don't have carbohydrates, you're not going to...
You still do, though, Michael. Remember gluconeogenesis. Wow.
You can decrease the amount of glutathione that's produced, which can potentially impair...
Potentially. Good. There's the old caveat there, potentially. Maybe not two then, Michael. Great. What's next?
The
9 swings, 9 misses. Out 3 times. Probably time to sit down and shut the fuck up now, isn't it? No, you've still got a bit to go.
System, so that you can't clear methylglyoxal.
Rubbish.
Then you say, okay, well, there's the aldolase system. Fine. But aldolase is...
So let's pull another system out in isolation, which still won't be very informative because you still haven't shown us the gearbox. Or even alluded to the fact that the cogs all come out of a gearbox.
Dependent upon NADPH, which again is coming from the pentose phosphate pathway.
Which is still subserved by the glucose that's still in your blood because of gluconeogenesis.
So when you don't have adequate carbohydrates, you may have a more difficult time...
And maybe not too. Good.
...actually clearing out methylglyoxal.
Yeah, no problem.
Because you won't have enough glutathione.
Yeah, I do, still.
And potentially not enough NADPH.
Yeah, potentially not as well. Good.
For these two systems that clear methylglyoxal to work effectively.
And methylglyoxal is not a problem. Still, I've dealt with it, as I said.
So not only are you not protected from the glycation, you're in a circumstance where you're potentially less able to break down the...
Absolute fucking nonsense, boy.
That reactive methylglyoxal, which is much more reactive than both glucose and fructose across.
Good thing it's not a problem.
Then the question here now is, if you're on a low carbohydrate, high fat diet, what do you do? And the answer is you add carbs back on board, of course.
No, you don't. You do no such thing. Absolutely the last thing you should do, in fact.
And in theory, yeah, it's very simple.
No, you should not be doing that. Rubbish.
But there's a couple things that you have to keep in mind. The first
one, don't fucking add carbs back into your diet. Good. What's next?
Thing is that your body is transitioning here. So your body is transitioning from what's going on inside the mitochondria, from what's going on in your hormonal system, from what's going on with the CO2 and oxygen production, from what's going on in terms of your electrolyte balance, GI tract in terms of the ability to upregulate carbohydrate absorption, shifts in the microbiome in terms of fermenting fibers.
So your body is set up, if you've been eating a low-carb diet for a while, in such a way as to be best conduced for that. And you're telling us to add carbs back in because you've given us 9 completely nonsensical, erroneous, garbage reasons why we should swap back to carbs. No, we still shouldn't, Michael. No. And now finally, you're going to say, but do it carefully, which is the first thing that you've said that's correct. Only that's all destroyed by the fact that the advice you're giving, put carbs back into your diet, is absolutely contraindicated. You should not do any such thing. Still.
Fermenting bile acids, fatty acids, and amino acids. And then also you have a circumstance where the hunger hormones are shifting, where the hormones that are upregulated with very high protein and fat intake, like cholecystokinin, peptide, YY, GLP-1, and ghrelin, those were really elevated, those are going to come back down when you start to drop fat and protein and increase carbs. And then now you have a circumstance where you have to, your appetite's going to pick up, and you're not going to be able to get away with one meal per day. So you have multiple shifts.
Right, so what are you suggesting there, Michael, that if you eat carbohydrates that you're unable to moderate the amount of food you eat because your hunger and satiety mechanism is all fucked up by it? Okay, good.
That are actually going on as you transition from being low carb, high fat to adding carbs back in your diet.
Yeah, but don't do that, still.
And this shift has to be done appropriately, or you're going to run into
this particular shift should not be done at all, still. No.
Problems along the way. So how do I navigate this shift with clients?
Well, by not fucking doing it.
That I'm working with on a consistent basis. Well, the first thing is
nobody should work with Michael. Nobody should pay Michael a red cent for advice. Michael is a fucking imbecile who ought to go and clean the fucking bedpans.
I start to gradually increase carbohydrates in people's diets. Now, you want to go slow so that you...
No, you don't want to do that at all. You do not want to increase the carbohydrates in your diet, still.
You can upregulate that transport in the intestine and get your body starting to use those carbohydrates again. And you're going to have to manage the shifts in blood sugar that happen, because when you are very...
You're not going to manage the shifts in blood sugar if you have any amount of carbohydrates coming in. That is going to predispose you necessarily, concomitantly, cause and effect to a vastly wider swing of your blood glucose between the fasted state, and the immediately fed state. That's going to happen on carbs. On fats, no. That is a real problem. That isn't. Are we done here?
Low carb. You start to add in carbs, you're very insulin resistant.
No, it's still a construct and still one you do not understand, Michael.
From a physiologic standpoint, it's not necessarily a type 2 diabetes.
Saying from a physiological standpoint and then saying anything, Michael, is absolutely fucking ridiculous coming out of your ignorant, arrogant fucking mouth, because you don't understand any of this. Clearly, patently, at all. Not to a remotely competent standard.
But you're running on fats, which is going to impair utilization of glucose.
Rubbish. Impair suggests that you ought to be able to run on any amount of glucose. No, that's not the biological design of a human being. We are designed to run on fat and to produce the amount of glucose that we require ourselves, not to be consuming it in our diets. Still.
So you want to gradually increase carbohydrates?
No, you fucking don't. No, you don't want to do that at all.
And you can do this in either 25 or 50 gram increments
or, if you're remotely sensible, you do it by not doing it at all.
Per day on a weekly basis. So say for week 1.
Oh my God, seriously? I suppose your people that listen to you are stupid enough to need this spelt out.
You increase by 25 grams of carbs per day. Week 2, now you increase your another 25 grams, so you're 50 grams
Jesus.
up. Week 3 will be 75, or you can move in 50 gram increments instead of 25 gram increments. When you're selecting your carbohydrate sources here, you want to use low FODMAP sources.
No, you don't want to be consuming carbohydrates at all, ideally, still.
That are easy to digest. These are going to help you to avoid digestive issues down the road as you start to add carbs back in.
Rubbish.
Especially because that microbiome is shifted and absorption may be shifted initially. So you want to go slow and you want to use easy to digest carb sources.
You don't want to use any carb sources at all, still, ideally.
And I'll link the food guide in the description here, because
don't bother.
The food guide lists some of these easy to digest carb sources in the top tiers. Now, once you are starting to add those carbohydrates...
So easy to digest, would that suggest rapidly acting on the bloodstream? Okay. Fucking idiot.
Sources in, your blood glucose is going to be a little wonky. So you're going to want to...
That's going to be all over the fucking shop, so don't fucking do that.
Make sure you set up the diet appropriately to stabilize your blood glucose.
Great, that's hypercarnivore. Thanks, Michael. You absolute fuck monkey. You utter cock blanket. You mindless, ridiculous fuck splat. Thank you very much. Good. Wow.
So that means you're going to want to have a protein source, an easily digested carb source, low FOD.
All right, so now you're telling us you absolutely do not understand the Randall cycle. We knew that anyway, those of us that do. But there you go. Oh, my word. My word, my word, my word.
Map, well-tolerated fiber source, and
Oh, my God, no, you don't want any fibre in your diet. No.
fat source present in each meal, and then the meals standardized across the day. So
You only want one meal a day, and it shouldn't contain fibre or carbohydrates or plant material. Still.
Stabilize your blood sugar.
Yeah, that's the diet that I've just described is the one that will do that, Michael. Not any diet containing any amount of carbohydrate. You ridiculous, mindless, arrogant.
You can have a more even blood glucose curve when you start to add carbs back on board. So
Oh my God. Oxymoron much or just fucking moron?
You want to have these solidified meals, maybe set them 3 to 4 hours apart. And have
Or maybe just have one meal a day based on fat, and as in the fat of animals and the flesh of animals. Muscle meat will do. You don't need anything else. Just muscle meat and associated fat, salt and water, plus or minus eggs and dairy if you like. No plants, no fibre, no carbohydrates. Don't need those.
3 to 4 meals per day. Once
No, you don't need 3 or 4 meals a day. That's ridiculous.
the diet is organized, the next step is you have to balance your micronutrient status.
All right. According to whom, on the basis of what?
And in this circumstance, you're going to want to increase your potassium, your magnesium intake.
Oh, right. So now Michael knows absolutely what everyone's electrolyte balance is without any nuance that everyone's going to be a bit different in this regard. Tell you what I do know. Everything you need by way of both macro and micros can be found in the muscle meat and associated fat of animals. Everything.
And potentially your calcium intake, because a lot of
And potentially not too then. Good.
low-carb diets are very high in phosphorus and very low in calcium, and also very high in protein, which
Luckily, that's exactly what you need under those circumstances. That's the exact thing that's been selected for by positive selection pressures for, it seems like maybe 4.5 million years it looks like we've been eating meat, largely.
adds to the acid load. So what you're going to
Oh, fucking rubbish. Acid load. Those of you that don't understand how stupid what Michael has just said is, go and have a look at my series of videos where I'm responding to Dr. James DeNicoli, no nuts. Dr. James DeNicoli, no ideas. Dr. James de Arroganti. It's great fun. There's about 10 different videos done over a series of months where there was backwards and forwards between myself and James, only except no direct backwards and forwards because he doesn't have the set to front up and have a discussion with me live on camera about it because he's a pussy, basically. Anyway, no, not acid load, rubbish.
want to do is make sure your potassium, magnesium, and calcium are dialed in, and then you
Yeah, they are, thanks. They are, and they're dialed in by the fact that I eat a species-appropriate, species-specific diet, mostly. I wish I was better, but I'm not perfect. I never said I was.
in this circumstance want to actually bring your sodium intake down.
Yeah, maybe not too. Depends. It's very individual as to what you need.
You may not need as much sodium now because you're going to be able to reabsorb it much better at the kidney with the insulin signaling back on board. Then from there, you're going to want to replete.
Or you could intake an appropriate amount of electrolytes for what's happening.
Your micronutrients in the form of vitamins. And some of the
Oh, yeah, here we go.
most important ones here are going to be your B vitamins, particularly vitamin B1
Right, so where do B vitamins come from, Mike?
can be quite important so that you can start to activate pyruvate dehydrogenase again, which allows carbs to move inside the mitochondria. So you want to
Yeah,
bring...
but you don't need any of that happening particularly any more than what's already happening, because if there was a problem in getting pyruvate through the pyruvate dehydrogenase complex to produce acetyl coenzyme A, and there wasn't enough acetyl coenzyme A being produced by beta oxidation, Michael, then you'd be dead pretty quickly. Given that that doesn't happen, mostly, people don't just suddenly drop dead, mostly, because of lack of acetyl coenzyme A, without being poisoned, then this is just yet more ridiculous reductionist nonsense coming from a buffoon. What's next?
a high-quality B complex on board and potentially add some vitamin B1 with
Yeah,
your
and potentially not too good.
meals so that you can tolerate some of those carbohydrates.
Oh, right, so you need to take vitamins to tolerate carbohydrates, do you? Oh, okay. Funnily enough, on a carnivore diet, you don't need to take any nutritional supplement of any kind. It's almost like that diet's the appropriate one.
as you start to add them back in slowly and gradually into your diet. So
Yeah,
these,
but don't do that still.
these are going to be the overarching steps that I would put in place.
Yeah, but why would anyone listen to you, Michael? It's absolutely clear and patent that while you have clearly studied various aspects of nutrition and various pathways and things, you have absolutely no idea how to put these together, how they work together, what homeostasis is. You have absolutely no grasp of the vast institution of your comprehension of holistic functioning of a human body. You're just an arrogant child. You should shut the fuck up. You've got absolutely no place advising people about nutrition. None at all. You're an imbecile. You're an embarrassment to yourself, to your country, to your family, to your nation at large. Fuck right off, basically.
If you want to know your specific calorie and macro targets...
Oh, fuck, there we go. Calories now. So why don't you tell us you don't understand first principles or basic physics as well, Michael? You just did. Ooh. Dear oh dear, calories, he said.
or which foods you can start to use, I would check out the pro-metabolic.
Yeah, I wouldn't check out anything produced by Mike Fave in any way, shape or form. It's absolute fucking nonsense. Rubbish.
Diet calculator and food guide. The link is in the description. It's completely free. So
That's also, you know, what you get, what you pay for, I suppose, isn't it? It's completely free. Well, you'll get good value then.
now that I've shown you,
Of course, I'm sure Michael would be happily to charge you some money because he's talked about his clients before. Why would anyone pay Mike Fave to do anything except clean the fucking bedpans? Because that's your job, isn't it, among other things? I know nurses do more than just clean bedpans, and I'm not berating nurses. Nurses are awesome. Nurses are great. Nursing is a fine profession. However, what do nurses do? They do nursing. Not professing. Who does professing, Mike? Oh yes, professors. Those with demonstrated, proven track records in the fields of endeavour to which they are competent to profess. All right? Basically, what Michael's saying here is that he's a gynecologist, no experience, but he'll take a look at it for you.
why sugar or carbohydrates are a better fuel source for your body than fat.
But you haven't given us a single reason why they are, Michael. You've given us 9 ridiculous, reductionist, arrogant, stupid opinions, none of which pan out in the objective reality in which we find ourselves, none of which are backed by empirical, experimental science in any way, shape or form. You've given us your mindless fucking opinions. Nothing else.
And we talked about how you can actually reintroduce carbs into your
But you still shouldn't.
diet. The next step is to figure out which carb sources are the ones that work best.
Yeah, no. The next step is to go back to the first step. Don't add carbohydrates back in.
For your individual context. So check out this video.
No, don't check out any videos by Mike Fave. Or his little friend Feldman. Or Danny fucking Roddy, you ridiculous cunt. Or anything put together by Ray Pete in the last 20 years, because you won't understand a fucking word of it anyway.
Where I show you exactly which carb sources to bring back into your body.
Yeah, there are no carb sources that your body should have by way of food intakes.
And why you would want to use these individual carb sources
You don't.
for your individual context.
You don't still.
Here.
Right. There we go. Absolutely fucking ridiculous. Arrogant beyond belief. Mindless as fuck. Not a single thing that pans out. Nothing worth hearing at all except my take on why there's nothing worth hearing here. That was gold. I hope you enjoyed it. Join me next time when someone else will be wrong on the interwebs, because it does not look like slowing down anytime soon, does it? No. See you then.